Today's sermon is called Bring Them Home. Bring Them Home. And Pilar Milhollen is going to help us pray the prayer of illumination.
Like the sun I might have known if God had granted me a son. The summers die one by one, how soon they fly on and I am old and will be gone. Bring joy. She is young. He is only a boy. You can take, you can give. Let them be. If I die, let me
Bring them home. Home. Where the heart is, where love is, where comfort is, where identity is formed and reformed, where mistakes are made and sometimes forgiven, where second chances are necessary and sometimes free, where truth is spoken with love under its wings, where food and flavors and music and language and customs form culture that we take with us for the rest of our lives. Israel was homeless, in exile. Their best people, their finest leaders, their stuff, the spoils of war. And Ezekiel was a priest who became a prophet in the time of the Babylonian exile, when God's people were devastated, despondent, depressed, and scattered in diaspora. Zeke saw a vision. 4 living beings, 4 wheels with wheels inside the wheels, way up, the spiritual says, in the middle of the air. His vision was a commissioning. He was given a scroll to eat with words of lamentation on it, a scroll that he described as tasting as sweet as honey. And he was prohibited from going among the people, an exile in exiles, and prohibited from speaking unless God spoke to him. Speaking only when spoken to, warning a people, chastising a people, persuading a people, comforting a people, preaching to the people, teaching the people, to see God's vision, to dream God's dream, helping a homeless people recover their identity. A call to be who they were designed to be, away from home, on the way back home. One writer says, in Ezekiel's world, superpower politics and small-scale ethnic nationalism were buttressed by idolatrous practices that legitimated military alliances, violent crimes, and oppressive economic policies. In the face of Israel's disintegrating independence and identity, old theological certainties collided with the massive shock of warfare, destruction, and deportation. Surrounded by political deportees suffering the consequences of imperialistic terror, Ezekiel's goal was to reconstitute a people whose character corresponded to the holiness of their God and whose identity would declare God's righteousness and justice among the nations. Can you hear the parallels between Ezekiel's world and ours? Superpower politics make our global context dangerous and violent, wanton. Ethnic nationalism causes skirmishes among people who look alike, who share the same heritage, but not the same religion or tongue or tribal identity. War and might make right. Oppressive economic policies are reinforced by weak leaders, and the poor keep getting poorer. Old theological certainties collide, and war and destruction and terror are the result, and too many of God's people have lost their way. They're not home, and they don't have a compass to find their way back to their highest, best self. They struggle to make meaning in their lives. They forget who they are, and they forget whose they are, and they wonder if God loves them, and will God come to find them. Then and now, Ezekiel says, God will do anything to protect God's divine reputation. Let me say that again. God will do anything and everything to protect the divine reputation. God will forgive us over and over again. Come and find us, chase us, pursue us. Be silly about us. Because God wants the nations to know that God is God and that God is faithful. So in the text that Cheryl read, Zeke is reminding the people of God that God is actively on the move to be their shepherd, to seek them, to rescue them, to bring them out of exile, to gather them up, to feed them on the good food on the high mountains, and to make them lie down. In the Hebrew, this word, to make them lie down, is something like lay them on the mother's breast to be comforted. Isn't that beautiful? God promises and Ezekiel prophesies that God will bring the people home. God will bring the people home. So, Middle Church, I've been thinking on the way into the holiday season that we are like Ezekiel. That we are called by God to boldly do a new thing on the earth, to bring people home to the place where hearts are healed, where wounds are bandaged, where love and resources are shared, where hugs symbolize acceptance, where the vision of a more just society is articulated in art and dance and song and puppetry and prose and poetry and preaching and prayer, where we, on God's behalf and for the divine reputation, are called to attract friends, to retain members, to nurture spirits, to deploy activists ready to heal the world, to grow leaders and to develop partnerships, because we cannot do God's work by ourselves. I love the lyric to the song that's inspired by June Jordan's poetry. We are the ones we've been waiting for to do the work of reconciliation and restoration, the work of return and recovery, the work of identity making. This is what it means to be Christian today. This is what it means to be the people of God today. It's a universalist vision of all of God's people of every tribe and nation praising God in one voice. We are partners with God. We are God's hands and God's head and God's feet and God's heartbeat. We are the ones we've been waiting for to do this work of healing and nurturing and binding up and suturing and moving into a future called peace. It is critical work in times like these, and it takes all of us. This is not a spectator sport. It takes time, and it takes talent, and yes, it takes treasure. It takes time. So this morning, 7 adults were at a Freedom School meeting planning for December 7th. It takes time. So 45 people go to gospel choir rehearsal on Thursday nights. It takes time. How many hours do we spend, middle volunteers, making this thing move? It takes time, and it takes talent. So on Wednesday night, our talented gospel choir joined the Lower East Side Girls Club Chorus and the Stop Shopping Choir. By the way, you haven't seen things happen until you've seen Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping Choir. It's a show. It's fabulous. All of them here with Joan Baez as a headliner to raise money to do justice in the world. It takes talent. And while we were here, one of our beloved was in St. Louis. I'm going to quote a Facebook post from Charles Randolph Wright. When I realized that the Motown tour was going to St. Louis this week, I knew I had to do something. And so I had met Alonzo Bird at the Incredible History Makers event at the Library of Congress. We were at the same table, and as he and his wife were about to leave, I found that he was going to St. Louis. I told him I wanted to go there and invite students from Ferguson to see Motown. He picked up his phone. I told my friend, the amazing Gwen Eiffel, who picked up her phone. And before it was over, we had 100 students at the event on Wednesday and another 100 at the event on Thursday. Motown healed a divided nation years ago and continues to do so. What I experienced these past few nights reiterates why we do what we do. Art, Charles says, is the salve that heals our wounds. People ask, why did I want to go there? And I said I wanted those students to see what someone who looked like them could do, who had directed the show, and that and their geography doesn't limit their dreams, and that the darkness in which they find themselves can turn into light. It takes talent. And bringing God's people home takes money. It takes treasure. Now, we don't like talking about money, most of us. It's kind of like that icky thing that you keep a secret, and actually, it is the secret diversity in our community, right? We look around the room and we can tell that we're Pan-Asian and Pan-Latino and Pan-Black diaspora and Pan-White, Pan-European. We can see the diversity of sexual orientation and family system and that kind of thing. But what we don't see is the great economic diversity in this room. And I think part of that is why we don't talk about it. We just don't talk about money. I want to tell you a little short money story about me, and then I want to tell you another money story. I was homeless twice. Homeless twice. Between jobs and frankly, between relationships. Looking for a place to live, trying to find a place to be, living out of hotels. And in that time of homelessness, my mom and dad's teaching about tithing was something that comforted me and anchored me in my life. In other words, things were spinning. And I didn't really have much to count on except my family story, my identity story, the stuff I brought from home. And even though I didn't find a church to go to, because I didn't, I was in California and I'd go into a church and the people would ignore me, and I don't know, that didn't seem very warm and friendly, so I didn't stay. I found something to tithe to. I tithed then to the United Negro College Fund because a mind is, after all, a terrible thing to waste. And I would tithe to the Boys and Girls Club. And I'm not trying to say at all that because I tithed, then God blessed me with a job, although I did get one. I am trying to say that tithing itself was a blessing. I'm trying to say that tithing itself was a blessing because in the discipline of that, I felt deeply connected to the God who had brought me thus far by faith. And I felt actually nervous enough, insecure enough about my funding that I knew I had to lean on the everlasting arms. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? That's my story. Let me tell you a better one about an old woman named Olga Downey. Olga was a long-term member of Middle Church. Her husband, Ben, was on the consistory, the board with Gordon. He was cranky, resistant, and an obstructionist. This is what I've been told. I'm just saying. Nonetheless, he came to church every Sunday. He came to church after Gordon asked him to resign from the board and stop obstructing things. And he brought his wife, Olga, and a couple of years later, he died, leaving Olga by herself, living in their beautiful two-bedroom East Village apartment for $100 a month. If I could turn back the hands of time. Anyway, Olga came to everything Middle did, volunteered in the clothing ministry, volunteered in the food pantry, got her clothes out of the clothing pantry, looked poor, seemed poor, began to sort of decline mentally. And as she did, you know, Gordon had promised Ben that he would take care of her, and he visited her every day, either at her apartment or at the hospital. One night, Olga wandered out by herself and actually was found in the street and went to the hospital, and Gordon visited her there, and then she died. This is in June of 2000. And so, though they prepare to say goodbye to Olga, they do the funeral. She has left everything she owns to Middle Church. And Gordon thinks, well, that's really lovely. That'll be 15 or 20 bucks, because what does she have? Gordon and the custodian, Middle's custodian, then went to her apartment to do some cleaning and look around in there and just shut it up for her. And they knocked over a bathroom hamper in which were taped to the bottom of it stocks and bonds valued $600,000. $600,000 is what she had put aside to give to her church. Somebody's writing down, memo to self, give Middle $600,000. It's great. Please do that. What will you give to make this thing happen? What will you give to make Middle run so that it is a homecoming place for the queer teens in the street who can't stay home and come out, so that it is a safe place for working on racial reconciliation, so that it is a home place to get our spirit fed and fueled so we can go out and feed the hungry in the soul food truck? What will you do? What will you give so that this space of grace can be amplified in its impact through sending our worship out in the world and social media and doing the stuff that we do to create public theology? Your giving makes it happen. Collegiate Church pays 2/3 of our budget, and we pay 1/3. If there was no Collegiate Church paying 2/3 of our budget, you would have me and Jonathan on staff. That could be fun. But I would miss Adrian. I would miss my team. The Collegiate Church promises to do the senior minister. You don't pay for me. And the Collegiate Church promises to pay for a musician. 2/3 and 1/3. The 1/3 of our budget that you do, Middle Church, make sure that we have a full team of leaders. The 1/3 of the budget that you do, make sure that it gets warm in here, and then when Adrian flipped the switch, that it gets cool. The 1/3 that you do, make sure that we have money so that we can buy supplies, so the children can go to education, so we can buy the sandwiches and the meat for the butterfly, that you buy the gas for the soul food truck so it goes out in the world and spreads the food. So you buy the books that happen in the adult education so that we have Chat and Chew next door. That's the 1/3 you do. What will you do? Will you, in this season of celebration, where the commercials and the tinkling of jingle bells will draw you into a commercial frenzy to buy holiday presents, I'm asking you to think about making a holiday present to this home. Hear the sounds of the choir, the praying, the preaching, the drawing, the lovely voices of little ones reminding us that there's new life. I'm going to call you and write you an email to follow up. But I want to ask you to think about the way God blesses you here, and will you support it financially? We're Ezekiel. We're Olga. We have the stuff to heal the world, and we're the only ones to make it happen. May it be so.